Okay. Um, I I've thought about discrimination, well, against boys, when and men when I was too young to know the word discrimination, but I saw the unequal treatment, and there was a lot about the way men and boys were being treated that I didn't like from as far back as I can remember. Um, but then feminism came along and was saying things about women that really shocked me because I thought women lived on a pedestal and had it easy. Um, and then they said things about men that that were just ridiculous, and I was learning things about women that I hadn't thought of because the female experience is so different from the male experience. But the male experience is so different from the female experience that they were, look for me looking at them thinking that they're privileged and on a pedestal, um, was as inaccurate for many women as what feminists were saying about all men. It's inaccurate for 99% of men. So I felt that there needs to be a dialogue, and I would go to feminist meetings, and they would some of them would just kick me out. Some of them would say, well, okay, you could sit there and watch, but you can't talk. And I said, well, why can't I talk? Why can't this be a dialogue? And well, you've been talking for 2,000 years, and it's your turn to listen to us. And I no, I haven't been talking for 2,000 years, and this needs to be a dialogue. So I started thinking more and more about men's issues, and I went to a national conference on men and masculinity. This was in 1976, and it had the top people in the world who were dealing with men's issues. And I was talking to them about things that to me were obvious, men's issues, and they kept saying things like, "Oh wow, I've never thought of that before." And I'm thinking, you're the top people in the world on this, and you never even thought about the military draft or men's life expectancy, or just this long list of men's issues. And one of them, it was a male feminist conference, which is really all that existed at that time. The men's movement was really male feminists who were really an auxiliary to the women's movement. They're not really a men's movement, and fathers' rights movements. But the fathers' rights movements organizations didn't really look at society as a whole. So they didn't see the interconnectedness of all the issues. So, for example, they would be in favor of the all male draft because that's a traditional thing, and they didn't see that the all male draft is society's way of saying that men are expendable, and as long as society believes men are expendable, then there's no way you're going to be you're expendable from the family. You're not going to get equality as a father. So I was working on the interconnectedness of all of this, and there was one feminist there, Warren Farrell, who was a hero of the feminist movement back then. And although he also had not thought about these issues that I was talking about, um, he said that you really, you have a lot of interesting things to say. And at that time, I was looking for a career that I was good at and enjoyed. And there were things that I was good at and things that I enjoyed, but they didn't really intersect. And I realized, he said, just figure out what you're good at and enjoy and start doing it. Just call it your career, it'll work out. And so he gave me that encouragement, and I felt I'm good at this and I enjoy it. And so I quit my job, which was teaching at the time, and felt I want to work in the men's movement, the men's rights movement. But the problem is there was no men's rights movement. So I have to create a men's rights movement. And that's what I set to do. It took a year to arrange getting uh, laid off from my job. And once I got that, so 1977, I set about creating a men's rights movement.
Well,
Some,
I was
oh,
gonna say first of all, I think everyone here is very grateful that you did, as it's necessary. And I know the um, vitriol directed towards us even now, so I can imagine how many bumps and scrapes and bruises you must have faced along the way. And to something you said when you said you went to those feminist groups, and oftentimes you weren't even allowed to speak. In that debate I had 2 days ago, I made that very point. There's a little bit of a hypocrisy when it comes to feminists, because they say on one hand, we are against toxic masculinity. What is toxic masculinity? Oh, it's how men don't feel free to express ourselves. But being a men's rights activist is men expressing themselves. And then when we do it, we're told to be quiet. And then feminists say, well, feminism is enough to address men's issues. And we don't need a men's rights movement because feminism has it covered. But then we see how feminists completely ignore issues like conscription, issues like pension ages. They may give it brief lip service, but they're not really actively doing something about it. And then so we point that out, and they say, oh, well, it's not all about men. Feminism is about women. But I thought you said feminism is for equality for both sides. So it's fine if you want to have a women's movement for women. That's completely fine. But then let the men's rights movement exist. It doesn't bother me that feminists only look at women's issues, because the men's rights movement mostly only looks at men's issues. We're a men's movement. There's nothing wrong with that. But then don't tell the other movement that they're not even allowed to exist. I respect women's rights to have their own movement. That's fine. But then give us that same, respect back.
yeah, there's as I survey the political spectrum in the United States and in the world, I in terms of sexism, I think the most sexist part of the spectrum is the feminist organizations. They are more sexist, more proudly sexist, really, than anybody else. They
And you were specifically saying the organizations, the political they were good feminists. They were good human
right,
beings who called themselves feminists, but it's those political organizations.
right.
Yeah.
There are feminists who believe in joint custody, for example, but there are absolutely no major feminist organizations that are doing anything other than vehemently opposing joint custody for fathers, and they're in they're in favor of single gender schools as long as it's just girls, but not for all boys schools. They're in favor of single gender agencies as long as it's for women's health, but they're against them if they're for men's health. So they're saying, don't consider someone's gender when you're looking in politics and trying to elect someone. Unless it's a woman, then definitely elect her because women are, like it's just, and they eliminate sexist. They want to eliminate sexist stereotypes, but they're creating new sexist stereotypes for everyone that they eliminate: mansplaining and women battering, and women's battered syndrome, and all of these men spreading, in buses and stuff. They're creating these new words. And as in the red pill, Karen said something which I've been saying for a long time, which is just the ultimate, this is a movement that's saying that they want to eliminate sexism from language. So we say police officers instead of policeman, and chairperson instead of chairman. We want to take all sexism out of language, and then it'll be better. Oh, this is a wonderful movement. What should we call it? Let's name it after women. Like it's just it's so basic. And if they don't get how basically sexist the idea of a non-sexist movement named after women is, if they don't get how sexist that is, they're just blind really to the whole thing. I was going to say before that some of the things that I introduced when I was starting this movement to differentiate it from what feminism was doing, was that feminists look at men and women as basically competitors and opposites. So if women feel powerless, men must feel powerful. If women did not create the system, men did create the system. Um, and I look at men and women as basically interdependent. So while a feminist will say if there's discrimination against women, there's an advantage for men. And if women have a problem, men have an advantage from their competitive paradigm. But if you look at men and women as interdependent, then if women have a problem, it creates problems for men, not advantages. Um, for example, if women are paid, they started saying 58%, now 70%, 77% of what men are paid, whatever statistic they want to throw out there, which is basically irrelevant anyway, because if you want to measure someone's standard of living, you measure what they consume, not what they earn. And women consume at or above the level of men anyway. But as long as women feel that they will only earn 78% of what a man earns, that means in a relationship, if we have children, somebody has to go out and earn some money. We can't both stay home and raise the kid. And since the man can earn more money, supposedly the finger is pointed to him, you go out and you work and you miss out on this opportunity of raising your child, which is the most rewarding thing in the world, raising a kid. And then there's a 50-50 chance of getting divorced. So now society is saying you can earn the money. So now you have two households to support and you have even less time with your children. So this so-called advantage that men have is really a disadvantage. And a real men's rights movement would be demanding that women, even if women didn't want to earn more money, we should go out and earn more money, earn your fair share. And so they didn't see that. But because of that thing that they didn't see, that women's problems create problems for men and men's problems create problems for women, that's the key to how they can portray everything as a woman's problem. That's how they could sell the idea that men don't have any problems, only women do, and women have this long list of problems. Because every time you take a men's problem, you can twist it into a woman's problem. Like if you were to Google low male life expectancy, and look at 100 random articles, 90, at least 90 of them will probably be an article about the poverty rate for widows, or the loneliness of widows because men are dead. Men dying is presented as a problem for women, where that's just one more thing that men do to make life tough for women, is we go and die on them, those selfish men. And so that's how I also, when I was starting the men's movement, I knew that a lot of research has to be done, and I couldn't do it all. So I taught the first course in men's rights at a university level, Tufts University. It's good school, very good school. And the first day, when students walked in and they really had no idea what men's rights is going to be, I said that men have all the problems, women have all the advantages, women have all the power. Tell me something that doesn't fit in with my theory. And they couldn't. Because every time they raised some women's problem, I was able to twist it into a men's problem, and make my point. And then I said, well, okay, I don't really believe this, but that's today's lesson is about that we are really interdependent as opposed to what feminists say, and therefore we both have problems and we both have to work on our problems together. You're muted, Thomas.
Sorry, I was going to ask, I'm curious, you said this was a class you taught at university. Knowing what the climate is like universities today and has been for a while, did you get any negative protests or pushbacks for having a men's rights class?
Nothing serious back then. It's nothing like cancel culture now.
Do you think that if the same thing were to happen today at Tufts and there was a class for men that opened up, You think there'd be protests outside the door on day one?
Oh yeah, they wouldn't even approve it to be taught. Definitely.
But it's true when they say they twist, feminists will twist a man's problem to a women's problem. A rebuttal I sometimes hear for conscription and the draft is, oh, well, the draft is actually proof of patriarchy and misogyny because it's assuming that women are too weak to be drafted. I don't think any of the women during Vietnam, and I don't blame them, were complaining about not being drafted.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think the person that's at home sleeping in their bed is jealous of the person getting torn to pieces by artillery fire. You know,
one very interesting thing I noticed was how the suffragette movement instantly morphed into the white feather movement and then back again around World War One.
Yeah, that you call their bluff, and say, well, okay, if that's what you believe, why are no feminist organizations demanding that we draft women along with men? I'll tell you another thing that I introduced back in the 70s when I was starting this movement, a difference between, what I was saying is that the language of sexism, since it's been, it hasn't been a dialogue, it's just been a monologue, just women describing everything. They have defined terms in terms of women. They've only looked at themselves. And for example, they would say the first issue for women is the right to not carry out traditional sex roles if that's not what they, well, no, actually, I'm sorry. They would say the first issue for women is to be allowed to say, I don't want to raise children. Don't pressure me into being a mom and staying home and raising children. Don't do that. And men aren't pressured to raise children, so therefore men don't have an issue. It's only women. But if you define that in terms of people, yeah, sure, men don't get pregnant, but having children and raising children is your traditional sex role. Our traditional sex roles are being a provider, being a protector, and initiating relationships. And what right do we have to say we don't want to do that? The draft, if we say we don't want to spend 2 years of our lives being a protector, we get thrown in jail. That's pretty serious. And I would rather work in a daycare center for 2 years than fight in Vietnam for 2 years. So we do have an issue in every single. So then the next issue for feminists was, well, once I have the right to say I don't want to carry out traditional sex, I don't want to raise children or have children, I do want the right to have a career, a good career like you men. I want career opportunities. I want to earn my power and fulfillment and rewards with a career. And but men already have career opportunities, so men don't have an issue. It's only women. Well, yeah, but if you redefine that, if you say that everyone deserves equal access to the way the other gender has gotten power and fulfillment and rewards, you get your power and fulfillment and rewards by raising children. You exercise tremendous power over the future of society and over your ex-husbands and over the children, obviously, by raising children. You get tremendous rewards. You live at the same standard of living as your husband, and you get tremendous fulfillment. We want equal access to that, and we call it joint custody. So we can. I went down the line taking every single woman's issue, and once you redefine it in terms of people, men have the same issue, and we're way behind women in terms of dealing with that issue because feminists are squelching discussion of it. Oh, everybody's on mute, so I don't know if anybody.
I was just going to say, this is like sitting underneath a learning tree. I'm just enjoying listening to you speak, to be honest.
Oh, thank
you.
you.
I'm enjoying listening and learning about the past when there wasn't a cancel culture and when you could just go to university and teach men's rights. It's quite a massive change.
You got that tunnel effect again, where I didn't understand what you said.
I'm enjoying listening under the learning tree as well,
Oh, okay.
because back in the past, when you could just teach in the university and not have cancel culture come and cancel you.
Yeah, Fred, I was going to ask you, in terms of the men's rights movement today versus back then, I feel like in a way we're both in a better position and in a worse position. We're in a better position because I think, well, let me start off saying we're in a worse position because of cancel culture, like you said, and how such a class would be banned today and wouldn't be allowed. But I think we're also bigger and more prevalent than ever before. I think the men's rights movement is probably more popular now than ever before. Would you agree with that?
Yes. And I just want to say about cancel culture, which is just atrocious, but I think I was able to teach that course because nobody had even thought of what I was doing. Um, but very soon after that, I don't think that they would have had the course. And other people have tried to start men's studies at universities. They've been trying to do that for decades. And feminists opposed any kind of thing, men's studies. They just weren't organized to stop me back in the late 70s. But I do see more people, and what's really heartwarming to me is young people like yourself and women. A lot of women, like Facebook groups, women against feminism, and women speaking out about this. To me, that's very heartening. And going to
Yeah, I'm saying it's a shame that we actually in our Discord, in our server, which we're hosting this Zoom for, it's a shame. I'm sure some feminists might point out that there are no women in this chat, but there is a roughly equal male to female split, including in the staff for the channel. It's a shame. I just don't know why. It seems like none of our female staff members seem to be online right now, which is a shame because I know Yidia would have loved to come. I'm sure Kathleen would have loved to come. And there's just bad luck that they don't seem to be online. But yeah, in our server, in our Men Are Human server, it's I don't know the exact ratio, but it's a roughly equal split of males and females who are coming in saying, yeah, we noticed this happening around us in our schools, to our friends, to our brothers, to our fathers, to our sons, to whomever. And we have quite a few ex-feminists coming in. And we see this on Reddit too, people saying, yeah, I was a feminist, but I was part of this group, or I was part of this blog, or I was part of this community, or I was part of the student union, and the toxicity of it drove me away.
Yeah, I think the movement is only in one direction, that there are no people who are into men's rights and then go, oh, now I've seen the light. It's really women who have the problem. There's only a flow from ex-feminists into our movement, and there's no flow going in the reverse. So that's good. I spoke.
That is so telling, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Not to get political, but I make the same argument. Nobody was trying to sneak into East Berlin.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Right.
So there are no MRAs who become feminists, but there are many, I shouldn't say no, because I'm sure someone will find an example, but for the vast majority of people who switch, they switch from feminism to the men's rights movement. Nobody watches the Red Pill documentary and says, oh, you know what? I'm not an MRA anymore.
It's true. Dennis Prager, I don't know if you know who he is, but he was talking about Black Lives Matter movement and how now we're supposed to look at society as just this terrible, systematically racist thing against blacks. And he said, but why are there hundreds of thousands of people of color trying to enter the United States if all they're going to do is find systematic racism here? They're trying to get in. What do they know that you don't know? as opposed to 1933 Germany, there weren't any Jews trying to get into Germany. You know, that's what systematic oppression is. So yeah, but that's totally a side issue. Um, but I was going to say that I spoke at the International Conference on Men's Issues, which is an annual thing, and there are a lot of British people involved in that. But it was in Chicago a couple of years ago, and it was just so heartwarming for me to see there's a movement, you know, something that I only dreamed of back in the 1970s, and I thought I'm the only person in the world who's thinking about these things, and now there's a whole movement, and although it certainly hasn't gotten the success that I was hoping for, it was just very heartwarming. I want to mention one other thing though, one other person. When I started this, there was no internet, and what I didn't know is back in 1977, when after I had quit my job and I started Men's Rights Incorporated, 400 miles to the south of me in Maryland, there was another guy who had the same idea, and he started an organization down there. So I'm not the sole founder, you know, of the men's rights movement. We met back then, we hooked up and just became lifelong friends, and he passed away a couple of years ago, so I'm the sole surviving founder now. You're back on mute.
I was just saying, sorry to hear that about, the others passing.
But
damn good work.
One of the problems in the men's movement is competition, and people fighting with each other instead of, it seems like too often they get together and they realize we agree on 95% of the stuff, so let's spend our time arguing over the other 5% instead of spending our time, working on that 95%. And he and I just never had that issue. We never saw a competition between the two organizations. We supported each other, and I loved him. It was just, I think of him every day. It was devastating when he died.
Well, Fred, I'm pretty sure I can speak for all of us here. Please feel free to join our server and participate. We have a voice chats every Friday. Obviously, it would be an honor to have you on. And I will say, I think Ma and Mike and Nep, we've definitely had our debates and disputes in the past for sure. But for the most part, I think we do a pretty darn good job of being on the same page and keeping the group going. So we'd love to have you.
Okay, that sounds good. And yeah, definitely you talk about stuff that you disagree with. You can debate it and discuss it, but when it gets to the point of one person saying, well, my priority is more important than your priority, you should work on my priority instead. What they need to do is say, you work on what you feel is important and I'll support it. I'll work on what I feel is important. You should support it, instead, well, breaking up the organization. I'm going to start my own organization. That's fatal, to the men's movement.
Are you part of?
Go on, Mark.
I've noticed that quite a few, the majority of us are actually against circumcision, but some of us are for circumcision. I've noticed that seems to be a split. I'm not sure how to really resolve that though, because people get really die hard about circumcision for some reason, like pro-circumcision, when it's really like the most cut and dried issue I've ever come across, at least one of them.
And to clarify, I'm pretty sure you don't mean, when you say us, you don't mean anybody in this chat. I mean, I'm certainly against anti-circumcision.
Oh, no.
But you mean some?
I mean a small minority of them who mostly contact me over Twitter or who show up in the Discord occasionally. We had a huge
you know who it is. You know who it is. It's all American. It's all those MRAs, or I would bet the vast majority of them are circumcised American or Canadian men who are in denial and they don't want to accept that something bad happened to them. That's what I think it really, that's where I think it's more because they don't want to believe that something bad happened to them. And so they're kind of in denial about it. That's my theory on those MRAs anyway.
I do think there's a good percentage of them who are very strongly in denial. And I think it's especially strong in the men who have circumcised their own sons. I've noticed that very, very much. The last major pro cutter we had on the server had circumcised his own sons and was very defensive about it. Unfortunately, we had a couple of people who are now banned who wouldn't let us have a proper debate with the guy and try to convince him. So yeah, that's another way that the movement can get split, actually, is the super radical ones who don't want to talk to the feminists and don't want to talk to the opposition at all and just want to sit in their little bubble and rant about whatever.
Yeah, I brought this up on the Vosh debate. Fred, do you know who Vosh is by any chance?
No.
He's a socialist feminist. I had a YouTube debate with him days ago. And something I said that we do on our server that I like, and that the men's rights subreddit does, is we have kind of a sort of a laissez-faire attitude towards banning people. We will ban people if they're abusive or trolling, but simply disagreeing, even simply being bigoted, if that's an honest view, I think it's more productive to talk to that person than just to ban them. Because if you ban them, they're just going to go somewhere else and think exactly the same thing. So people come in and sometimes they're genuinely misogynistic or genuinely misandristic, and they're genuinely sexist and they have genuinely negative, bigoted views. But we won't necessarily ban that person right away. We'll attempt a dialogue first, because that's the only way you're going to get someone to change their minds. Belittling someone, insulting someone, banning someone, silencing someone, it's only going to make those feelings stronger and more toxic. So we always at least attempt to have conversations. So that's what Ma was referring to. If someone comes in and they're pro-circumcision, we won't ban them from the group. We'll debate them on it.
I think that's a good philosophy to have. And you're right. That's something that I think sex and especially the penis, is such an irrational subject for people. So they just fly off the handle on that, because rationally, circumcision just there's no justification for it at all, really. I guess the only people who have a semi-legitimate justification would be religious Jews, where they say it's in the Bible. But even there, for one thing, in the Bible it also says spare the rod and spoil the child. So but if some parent was beating their child with a stick and saying, well, it's in the Bible, we would still, no, that's child abuse. You're not allowed to do that. You don't get the religious exemption for that. And this is clearly child abuse. It's a sexual, assault.
I always say in response to that, to both Jews and Christians, because like you say, it's used in the Bible as justification too. I always say two things to that. First of all, look at the traditions in the Bible you don't follow anymore. Do you put your wife in a tent on a menstrual cycle for 3 days? Mm-hmm. Do you eat shrimp and shellfish? So you're willing to modernize some old traditions, but circumcision seems like a very strange one to cling on to. And the second thing I say is, I think a religious ritual is much more significant. It's a much stronger covenant with God if an adult is choosing to do it. Doing it to a baby before they even know what they're doing, that doesn't really show anything.
Yeah. No,
I fully agree there. I also like to, my best argument against that is actually to point out that it's a different covenant and it doesn't actually apply to non-Jewish Christians. So unless you're a Messianic Jew, it really doesn't apply to you anyway.
Oh,
so
that's true. I'm Jewish, so I've had to fight
Mm.
this battle harder than most people. Um, but when I was growing up, there were no female rabbis. And it never even dawned on me to wonder why. Or, if somebody said, oh, she's a rabbi, I would say, what? Like it was beyond the realm of comprehension when I was a kid. And now, I would say half the rabbis in the Sacramento area are female, thanks to feminists. And I'm convinced that if we circumcise baby girls the way we circumcise baby boys, those same feminists, those same Jewish feminists who brought us female rabbis would have outlawed circumcision a long time ago. You just cannot touch, the genitals of a little girl without a legitimate reason, while you could touch and slice a boy. But people justify it. There's just no rational. Some people will tell me, well, there's a medical justification. They talk about disease, and I'll say, well, first of all, those are all debunked. But you don't even need to know about medicine. Just use your head for a moment. The United States life expectancy is actually relatively low compared to the other developed nations. So obviously, physicians in other developed nations are aware of the research. They're doing a better job keeping their patients alive than ours are. They know all this stuff. So why is it that the United States is the only developed nation that routinely circumcises baby boys? What do we know this is what, why are we the only ones? What distinguishes us, except for Israel, obviously? And just as a side thing, the rate of circumcision in Israel is going down. They're more and more starting to see, let's come up with with an alternative ritual instead of circumcising baby boys. So that's good to see. But why are we the only ones? And the answer is it just a coincidence that we're also the only developed nation that has a medical industry with a profit motive? In every other developed country, that they have a more socialized healthcare system. We're the only ones that are looking for a profit, and we're the only ones that circumcise boys. Is that just a coincidence?
I
Yeah,
don't think it is, because we have a study that, well, not study, sorry. We have a piece of information we came across, which was that before the NHS refused to do circumcisions, when it was a paid system, I'm mixing up my things. Forget what I said there. Before the NHS, there was a paid system where circumcision was common, to the point of being about as common as in the USA. But after the NHS came in, and doctors no longer got paid per circumcision, suddenly the rates just dropped through the floor. And within a couple of generations, we suddenly have a culture where there really isn't any circumcision outside the Jewish and Islamic communities. Even if they do still repeat on the NHS website some of the debunked sort of claims from those fraudulent studies from America that were conducted in Africa by Americans to validate circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
but yeah,
Sorry, I
to the
don't know how much of that made sense.
No,
I got a bit mixed up.
It did. It's very true. That once people have to pay for it, then they elect against it. It's also once they're talking about their own body. When somebody's in favor of circumcision, and they say, well, it's a parental decision. It's none of your business what I do to my child. It's a parental decision. But why is it that the only people who look at all the reasons for circumcising and decide that, okay, let's circumcise, why is it that those are only people who are deciding to circumcise somebody else. Those same reasons don't convince anybody to circumcise themselves. So I think that's, it's just so weak. We definitely should be suing the insurance companies in the United States to get them to stop paying for it. I'm not
And
sure
why is the male reproductive organ the one special exception that we have for cutting body parts off children? If someone wanted to normalize cutting off earlobes, or cutting off half of your pinky finger, or there's no other part of the body where people would just normalize mutilating at birth for no reason, except the male reproductive organ. And I think that goes back to what you said earlier. That ties in to male disposability and the male empathy gap. And feminists might point out that, oh, well, it was men who started the tradition. But that doesn't mean that men can't be affected by, and I'm going to steal a feminist term here, internalized misandry. Feminists talk about women that have internalized misogyny. Well, okay, men can have internal feelings of male vulnerability, and feminists would call it toxic masculinity. But I think male disposability is more accurate for that. But it's interesting how the term toxic masculinity, it's like touches on the truth. And you could have an honest, I think actually MRAs were the first ones to come up with the term toxic masculinity. And this is the debate I have quite often with feminists about toxic masculinity. And it always ends up me saying, I agree with you that there are inherent social expectations and norms placed upon men. But what I always disagree with is how feminists describe toxic masculinity and how they use it. It's kind of like they've hijacked the term. But you probably might, I mean, am I correct? I think toxic masculinity was first used by MRAs in the 70s.
Wow. I don't recall. It might have been. It might have been.
I'm pretty sure it was the mythopoetic men's movement.
The what?
The mythopoetic men's movement. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what they're about, to be honest.
And or male feminists also were also considered part of the men's movement. And the mythopoetic is what Ma is referring to, which is a different thing that I think maybe in the 80s that started. And they're the ones who sit around in drumming circles. They don't get involved in political issues, but they talk about the grief they feel because their fathers were distant, and their fathers died before they ever made that connection. And they talk about a lot of serious issues, and they do a lot of good, but they completely ignore all the political issues and actual discrimination against men. So like they would talk about their grief that their father was distant, but they won't deal with the discrimination against fathers in divorce system. And of course he was distant if you if the mom took the child to the other side of the country or something. So that's mythopoetic.
Can I ask you, Fred, do you keep an eye on what's sort of going on with men's rights outside of the United States?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I love when I find studies. Actually, this is not a men's thing, but one of the studies that just came out was ranking maybe 60 countries on trust in the media, and the country that was dead last in terms of trusting the media was the United States. Only 29% of Americans trust what they hear in the media. But yeah, I look, especially I would say custody issues, family law issues, and domestic violence. the studies of domestic violence are they're pretty much finding the same things in all countries. And the Facebook groups that the pages, I hate Facebook, and I'm trying to wean myself away from it. But there are a couple of pages and it's helped me kind of get in touch with other people. And there are well, I guess maybe just because of the language, it's just easier for British and American people to talk to each other. But I've hooked up with a lot of British people on Facebook. Elizabeth,
Have you?
do you know Elizabeth Hobson? Have you heard her
I know
name?
her very well. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually met her in London. I got invited to a private photography session.
She's, you know, she's in our
was
group.
there.
She's in your
Part of
group?
our, she's part of our server, yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I met her, Erin Pitsey, Natty Kadifa, and there's a couple others that I know sort of from Twitter and what have you, which is where I've been most active. Have you been paying attention to the changes in domestic violence laws here?
I'm sorry?
Have you looked into the different? Sorry. Yeah. Have you looked up the changes regarding domestic violence law in the UK?
No, have there been changes?
Yeah, we've gone to a more gender neutral sort of answer to domestic violence, and also Women's Aid and the other sort of feminist charities are starting to lose money and their influence. The feminists fought really, really hard to keep the status quo, and we've actually moved away from it.
That's good to hear. I've been reading coverage in Britain of domestic violence. You know, articles about how they're ignoring male victims, and I just read one. I think it was yesterday or the day before. An article about let's see. It was saying that they're undercounting the number of men who probably died at the hands of in domestic violence. But one of the things is that, and I kind of commented under that about just imagine if we were you know, as soon as a woman dies, the first person under suspicion is the husband. But men die and they just cremate them, or you know, like they don't really investigate as long as whatever the woman says, they'll take her word for it. But if we started to have the same suspicion of the woman and investigated her, just imagine how the numbers of male homicide victims would rise.
Yeah.
But so I do see that in the UK, more and more articles pointing to that discrepancy.
Have you heard of a lady by the name of Deborah Powney at all?
No.
She's done a massive survey on male victims of domestic violence as part of her PhD qualification. And it was actually released, the findings were released a couple of weeks ago. And I did put it up on the server, so if we can find a way of getting that to you, obviously we will do.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that. I'd like to find that. I know I've been saying for that the scientific research for the last 45 years has consistently found that women assault their partners as often as men. Consistently.
Yeah.
More, you know, I think there's now more than 2,000 studies that have found that, the scientific research. But what's quoted in the media is either non-scientific research, or they'll take the scientific research but only talk about how many, like Newsweek had a cover story on domestic violence once, back in the 70s, and they after the largest domestic violence study in the United States had come out at that point. And the headline, you know, was it was on domestic violence against women. It was a cover story, and it opened by saying almost 2 million American women are battered every year, according to, and then they cited this scientific study. what they didn't say anywhere in the article is that same study found over 2 million men battered, that the numbers were even greater. But they quoted the scientific study, but only what they found about women and ignored what they found about men.
That's all part of the empathy gap towards men, though, isn't it? It's a similar thing with when we had the Boko Haram story come out, and there was like over 2,000 men and boys that were executed, and the real concern was for the 370 girls, I think it was, that were taken prisoner.
Bring our girls home. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
They killed more boys, young boys, in that attack where they took the girls than they took girls.
And of course, if we bring it up, feminists say that we're just doing a what about the men? And this also.
Well, what about the 10,000 boys they've kidnapped?
And I always say, yes, what about the men? Like, they say that as if that's some wrong question to ask. Like, oh, you're just hijacking the conversation. No, I think you're hijacking the conversation to only be about women. We're not trying to make the conversation all about men or boys. We're trying to make the conversation about everybody. You're the one who's trying to make the conversation all about women and girls only. So it's completely, they twist it into the opposite of what it is, and then accuse us of doing that very thing.
It's very
and I think a lot of people repeat these talking points because they get brainwashed and they get manipulated into it. But when you look at how insidious it is, you must realize that at some points early on in the formation of these arguments and these talking points, someone is being intentionally disingenuous.
Yeah, well, the feminists have known about this research for a long time. And they are definitely being disingenuous when they continue to talk about battered women and ignore suppressed discussion about battered men. The study that I mentioned, that the largest one in back in 1976, it was feminist researchers. They were appalled by their own findings, and they didn't promote their findings either. They figured this must be some glitch. And so 10 years later, they did a follow-up study, another massive study, hoping to disprove what they found. And instead, they found that it was even worse, that the rates of battered women has declined and the rates of battered men has increased. So finally, they said, okay, we have to, this is what we find. We keep finding it. We have to publicize it. And they did, and were really threatened. They lost funding for future research. Their positions in universities were threatened. So it's been squelched, this information, but it's just what they find over and over again. And it's mostly feminist researchers who look into it, and the ones with the integrity say, this is what we find. We didn't expect to. Erin Pizzey didn't expect to find, so many violent women, but she had the integrity to say, these are the women who are coming to us. They're just as violent as the men. And we see what happened to her. In Sacramento, we kind of had our own Erin Pizzey, who also started the first shelter in Sacramento anyway for battered women. And she saw the same thing. It's violent women coming into her. And she started speaking out. And just like Erin, she was expelled from her own shelter that she had founded. And we became good friends. But it's a scam. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, the domestic violence industry. And they don't want to share that.
And
yeah,
I was going to say, I do think this is an issue where MRAs really are beginning to win through the general population. It's all over the internet. I see even in more left-leaning communities and environments, you'll hear men speaking up and complaining about it. So feminists still do control the narrative, but it's a pretty undeniable issue, especially when it happens to you directly or you see it happen to someone else. It's like it becomes pretty obvious. Oh, wow, okay. So I think this is an issue where we are rapidly making progress. There's still a lot of progress to be made, But a lot of guys, even male feminists, I think in the back of their minds, it's like little things I overhear. I'm in line at the grocery store, I'm at the gym, in LA, let's say I'm at the bus stop or the metro. I would overhear, especially in the last 2-3 years, especially, I would overhear little conversations between guys about exactly this, and there's still that kind of fear or embarrassment about talking about it. But for sure, I think that the awareness about this is boiling over. And I think it's a little bit, feminists have a little bit of glass castle on their monopoly on this conversation.
Yeah, I've noticed that men will occasionally speak up about things like themselves being hit and stuff like that. And you have to really be their friend to hear this stuff a lot of the time, or you have to overhear it. And they'll usually tell you in confidence. They'll often minimize it. Men minimizing the stuff that they've gone through is a theme. Often they will start with, "Oh, I've never suffered anything as bad as that. I'm really glad," and then they'll turn around and come up with something worse. And they'll say, "Oh, at least I haven't been here." Oh, wait, yeah, I have been. It's like men have this sort of memory block when it comes to being abused that women don't have, and women seem to be able to form lists of times that they were attacked and things like that, whereas men have to stop and think about it and spend several minutes going over oh yeah, actually I've had quite a violent life. Unfortunately, even as the 50-50 nature of domestic violence is becoming more prominent, there are feminist academics, in quotes, who are trying to reformulate things again. And their new tactic, and this is a favorite of Michael Flood's, is to deny that it's as bad. So he takes the 50-50 numbers and then he says, "Oh, it's not actually 50-50 because men don't find it as violent. Women don't hurt them as much. And so if you apply all these different false metrics that he has to the numbers, suddenly men are only 1 in 10 or something of abused victims of abuse." And he just does everything he can. But if you look at his actual website, there are so many contradictions in what he's saying. It's just unbelievable. He's got a page, I think, where he denies, as I said, the 50-50 thing using the severity. And then on another page, he denies this parity at all. And it's very, very, he will show you the page that he thinks is most related to, that has the highest chance of convincing you. And he knows that there are contradictions. So I've had him actually show me both pages before, and it's it's a bait and switch basically. He'll flip between these two different arguments that are contradictory, and he set up the whole thing so that it is like that. And this is a guy who is constantly cited by feminists in academia. I've gone through the Manosphere article citations, and I've come across just multiple references to him buried in the citations. It's people like that are a major problem, and it's very, very annoying because he comes over as nice, he comes over even as genuine at first, but then you notice the subtle abusiveness of him, and you notice the way he's trying to manipulate you. And it's often something you can't really put your finger on until you've analyzed what he's saying across the whole of his messages to you. And yeah, he very, very much comes across as sort of somebody who's concerned that you've got something wrong, and he's just trying to correct you in the nicest way possible, and then he just starts twisting. It's very interesting to watch, but I do believe that sort of thing is really what we've got to deal with now, although it's not like we haven't had to deal with that before. We have a video about feminist manipulations of statistics and things like that on the citation list. And we have multiple examples of them trying to manipulate stats and things like that. It's it's quite a game they're playing here. It's like they say they want equity now because saying they want equality backs them into a corner. It's all about word games and mind games, and those are all hallmarks of a movement that doesn't believe its own BS.
One of the things that researchers find, which he probably knows, is that women are more likely to use weapons than men, abusive women. And so the injuries can actually be quite severe.
Oh, yeah.
I also, I mentioned that largest study ever in 1976, and then they did the follow-up in 1986. And I spoke with one of the researchers, the two professors who did it, and about other kinds of violence that a woman can do. For example, suppose she tells her new boyfriend or her brothers that he beat me, just makes up some story, and they go out and beat the guy. His injuries can be quite severe, including death. How is that listed? And it's not listed as domestic violence. It's listed as murder by somebody else. So she's not given responsibility for that. But if you factor in those kinds of things, or if she calls the police and just makes up a story, he's beating me, come over, and the police come and rough him up, they do the violence for her. So, do your studies, I asked him, do your studies take into account surrogate abusers who are abusing a man on behalf of a woman? He said no. So if you add that in, that changes things even more. So that's, he said that would be really interesting.
Yeah, we've been trying to find studies on that for a while.
What bothers me about those numbers is, let's even take your number. Suppose it's only 10%. What percent of veterans are female? Isn't that about 10%? Would you justify denying female veterans, all their rights, their protection, their health care, their, all of the veterans' benefits just because they're only 10%? So even if it is 10%, how do you justify not having shelters, not having police protection?
I mean, to that point, the insane hypocrisy when you hear them talk about femicide in Mexico and Central America, and then you look at the statistics and you see it's something like, I forget, it was like 85, 90%, something like that, of victims of murder are men. So by that logic, so going by their crazy logic, and just so it's very clear, so no one takes a snippet of me saying this sentence, okay, this is not what I actually think, but going by their crazy logic, not only would you not recognize femicide, but you would say that the law on murder should only apply to male victims, because female victims are so much less common, they shouldn't be protected under law. Or you could say the same, and I think the National Coalition for Men actually used this exact argument in their lawsuit. Mark Angelucci, actually, rest in peace. I believe this was his argument, by the way, in California about 10, 12 years ago, when they were suing the state for the domestic violence laws. They said 95% of workplace injuries happen to men. So therefore, if you used feminist logic, you'd be saying that women should not be protected if they're injured in the workforce because they're a minority of them, which obviously makes no sense. So even if men only were 5% of victims, even if men were only 1% of victims, Even if only one man in history was a victim, if that one man calls the police should treat him equally under law.
Yeah. As I say more and more, if it wasn't for double standards, feminists would have no standards at all.
I'm very interested in the moment about you call it surrogate violence. We've been calling it proxy violence, and we've been trying to find information on it. There really isn't anything, is there? But violence by women seems to fit a few different categories, more categories than violence by men. So there's proxy violence, there's direct violence where they attack often with a weapon. First man I ever spoke to about domestic violence was attacked with a weapon by his wife. And then we have more subtle violence where we have things like poisoning. So you have a woman maybe slipping something into the man's meal to punish him. This is something that's a little bit more common than people realize, but we don't really have any stats on it. It's very hard to really detect unless the man ends up in hospital and the woman actually gets charged, or like it's an amusing case, like the man who was poisoned with peanut butter that he was grossly allergic to. His girlfriend or wife or something spread it on herself and invited him to lick said intimate part of herself. And if it hadn't been extremely amusing and they hadn't been able to post a picture of him making him look like an idiot on the news article, then there's absolutely no way we would have heard about this. So we've really got to look at all these different forms of violence that men don't even seem to engage in, as well as the direct violence men do engage in. I think Warren Farrell made a point about group violence against men. They often count all of the male aggressors, but they don't really pay any attention to the female aggressor, even though she might be the key instigator. I've actually had this occur to me directly, where a group of female instigators were trying to get me beaten half to death, but the police were only interested in the men who they actually set on me. I don't know what lie they told them, but it was probably that I was like attacking them or something, when actually it was the other way around.
Yeah, those are good points. I have a lot to do today, so I'm going to need to go, but I'm looking forward to Friday. And my son lives in Italy, so for him, like it would be an hour ahead. Is there any way that he can watch this?
Watch this particular stream, or watch the.
Yeah, what on Friday? Can he watch?
Oh, sure.
He can join if he wants.
Okay. How well, just send me an email or something on what he should do.
Yeah, it's just
sure.
It's on Discord. It's pretty open, pretty much open to anybody in the world who wants to start.
Okay. You don't have to be a member. Okay.
Well, you have to join the server, but it's very easy to do. You just literally click a button. There's no sign up. There's no email. You just need to come up with a screen name. I think you do have to have an email address. That's about it.
All right.
But Fred, thank you very much. It was an honor having you. I had to say, it was. You are one of the founding fathers, if you will, of the men's rights movement, and you've weathered many storms. And what you've done has, believe it or not, you have in fact changed the world, because the ripples, the butterfly effect of what you did, has probably affected millions of people. And that's not hyperbole.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Thomas. It's been great talking to you. Mike, you too. It's nice to see your initials, Ma. And yeah, I've enjoyed this conversation. I hope we all get to meet in person someday.
Absolutely.
Well, Thank you, and I hope we do too. I am sorry for hiding my face, but it's something that I've done since day one. And for personal reasons, I think it would be a good idea if I did not show my face generally. But
I have a
it's,
picture of your face in my mind. I bet it's going to be totally wrong when I actually meet you.
oh yeah,
But
probably.
you have short, dark hair.
Nope.
Oh, I'm already wrong.
Thank you
Can
very
neither
much, Fred. It's been
confirm
an
nor
honour to
deny.
meet you.
What's that?
It's been an honour to meet you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like. Oh, that's right. Are you in northern England? Is that what you said? You're in the north.
I live in South Wales, but currently I'm in Northern England. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. It was very nice talking with you.
I know.
Well, thank you, and I'll end the call if anyone wants me to. But you can all just leave if you want. It's just an open chat. So.
All right.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you, and I'll